Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'll tell you what, it is hot today, but I'm thinking I want to do a garden tour. We haven't done a garden update in a long time. I've got some things I really am excited to show y'all. First, we just got to take some snacks to the ladies here. This time of year, with this heat and sunlight, I like to check on the chickens 3 times a day. Always in the morning and evening, I make sure they've got food and water, and at night, making sure everybody goes up into the coop. But during the middle of the day, it's important to make sure they still have fresh, clean water. The last thing I want is dehydrated birds. In this heat, it's easier for them to get dehydrated, just like us. So good to make sure, mostly checking on the water. But anyway, we're here to talk about the garden, which is right over here behind me. I'm gonna flip the camera around. I've got a lot of cool things to show you guys. We're up here in the nursery. So this is where we have the potted plant area. This is kind of staging ground for pots and soil and materials. I need to go through and organize some stuff. It's a bit of a mess. But over here, where the air pruning beds are, this is where I've done most of my gardening this year. There's tons of plants to talk about in here. This is all new garden beds. You know, last year I mostly gardened down at one of the lower tunnels and by this house over here. I've now moved most of my gardening efforts up here next to the nursery and in these few beds. All right, so these 2 little beds here, basically what I did was, in the late winter, early spring, I dumped some soil, leaf compost, wood chips, whatever I had out on the ground. We had these old mushroom logs that I placed as kind of the outline of the bed. It's just a big rectangle. And these are mostly being used for tree propagation. So we've got spice bush seedlings in here, Osage orange seedlings. We've got some willow cuttings that are doing really well. These are actually like almost up to my shoulders. We've also got a few persimmons in here, little tulsi that I stuck in. There's a lot of elderberry, you know, more willow, elderberry down here. So you can see mostly tree propagation. I also like to let some volunteers come through on this bed. So there's some milkweed. There's not a lot of milkweed in this landscape, and so I'm letting some of these stalks come up. I'm not weeding them out. Other natives, like we get a lot of wing stem, those I am weeding because this landscape is just loaded with wing stem. Down here in this bed, we've got sort of similar situation going on in that there are some volunteers, like this tomato's a volunteer, but I also planted some annuals in here, some native partridge pea, evening primrose, but then there is more tree propagation going on. There's some persimmon seedlings in here, some more willow cuttings. This variety specifically is supposed to max out around 5-6 feet tall. It's kind of like a dwarfing willow. Also got some fun, you know, purple funky basils going on in here and more tree seedlings. Like with most of these tours that I do, there's so many plants, it's really going to be impossible to talk about every plant that's going on in this space. Trying to give a little bit of an overview. We're going to turn this fence off here. Now this is what I'm most excited to talk about, is this garden here. And I'll show you guys real quick. I'm learning about electric fences. This is all new. We've just got a Energizer from Premier, ground rod hooked up to these batteries. I charge them in the house as they get low. And then we've got these T-posts on the corners with these insulators for this big, thick electric wire. We've got one down very low to try to discourage raccoons and such from coming in under the fence. You gotta keep this weed whacked so it doesn't, there's no grass on the fence. Then we got a few more layers, hopefully discourage the deer. So far it's been working. I'll let you guys know how it goes throughout the season. Some nice wind blowing through. And just real quick, I'll show you, we got also these stakes from Premier. They have these little, I guess you'd call these insulators, rope hangers. I don't know what the word is for them. But anyway, for those who have seen some of the nursery videos, we're here next to the nursery. This is where we have all the trees and air pruning beds. There's this big flat patch right next to us that I thought would be perfect for a garden. One of the things I'm most excited to grow this year, as you may be able to tell, is corn. This is all flint corn, flower corn. And I'm thrilled to see this corn. This corn is now, some of them are taller than I am. I'm standing a little bit down below the corn right now. The way that we built this garden bed was we actually dug a trench right here where the path is, and same on the other side. And we flipped all the soil from the trench up into the bed. So that was kind of our initial loosening of the soil, was actually digging the paths, flipping them onto the bed. And then I came in and I dug little holes, and I would put a few corn seeds in, put a handful of compost, cover them all up with mulch. The corn came up really strong. A few weeks later, we planted these African peas, otherwise known as cow peas, black-eyed peas. You know, these go by many names, but they're a legume. You can eat them green, like in the snap, you know, the green bean phase, but I like to let them dry down on the plant and use them for soups and stuff like that. In my experience, these African peas are much more vigorous and hardy than your typical dry beans. I mean, the leaves are always just so green. They love the heat. They're going to climb the corn to some extent. You can see a little bit of that starting to happen right here. But I'm also thinking I might put a narrow trellis. Well, there's more peas on this side. There might be some trellising happening in here. This is going to get very overgrown very quickly. But that's kind of the whole point. You know, it's very dense and green and lush in here. I'm thrilled at how things are going. This gives kind of a representation of what things looked like in the corn patch a few weeks ago. You can see a lot more of the soil, although I've covered it with mulch. The plants are not as big. And in here, there's a lot of tomatoes. And you might say, well, hey, it's pretty late. You know, this is middle of July. It's kind of late for tomatoes. And yeah, it is. You know, I started my tomatoes super late. They kind of stayed in their little starter pots for longer than was ideal because I had a lot going on. But we did get them in the ground, and we'll probably start getting tomatoes here in August, and they'll probably go into September. I've done this late tomato planting before. In Zone 7B, it definitely seems to work out well. But when folks get their first tomatoes in June, you know, my tomato plants are like this big, but then most folks start running out of tomatoes late in the season. The tomatoes get blight, this sort of thing. I'm rolling in them late in the season, usually. And you can see, you know, there's a lot of weeds, a lot of grass going on here on the edge that we've got to get taken care of. It's all a work in progress. You know, the idea was that we were going to fill these pathway trenches with mulch. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. With a lot of mulch in here, that would hopefully suppress most of the weeds. You can see we've got lots of different types of basil going on in here. Also a lot of Tulsi. Holy basil is one of my favorite plants to dry for tea, so we've got a lot of that. There's also a lot of places where I've tucked in plants from the nursery. You know, we grew a bunch of natives and herbs and flowers in the nursery, and so I've got extra. Here's the sage, more of this Tulsi, mountain mint down in here. We've got some anise hyssop right here. So there's lots of plants just tucked in, you know, more volunteer milkweed, some wild strawberry. Down here, these are your typical, you know, regular dry shelling beans, right? And again, they're also going to need a trellis. They got sowed later than the peas. And some squash down here on this end. I'm kind of hoping the squash is just going to run. We made some nice mounds out of compost and leaves and mulch and things. Different types of squash, some summer squash, some winter squash. We'll see how they do. We definitely got these started on the later side. For the summer squash, they'll be fine, but there's not a whole lot of time for winter squash. They tend to be longer season. But again, same deal down here. I'm planning to get a ton of mulch down on this whole area to help smother the grass, give the squash somewhere to run, keep the soil cooler. All work in progress. You can see the deer fence. This whole area is fenced in. I don't know if you guys can tell by the sweat. I'm getting hot, definitely. I'm on full-on raccoon hours out here this time of year. Basically, I am active at dawn and dusk and not very much during the middle of the day. But like I said, since I came out here to check on the chickens, I figured we'd do a little walkthrough. I've been wanting to share this garden for a while. You know, it's been a long time since we did any sort of garden update. And so I'm just excited about how things are going and sharing with you guys. I hope you all got something growing. I guess I'll give a brief note on this corn. Like I said, these are flower corns, flint corns, and I planted probably half a dozen or more different varieties. So they're going to flower at different times, be different heights. There's a whole lot of diversity going on in here, and my intent is to keep letting these cross and select for over time, you know, corn that does really well in this environment. I guess I should also mention there's some tree propagation going on. There's some black locust in here, some persimmons and such that we'll dig up. One of my favorites of this corn is there's some that are really dark purpley red. Those are some of my favorite cobs. Ears to look at is the dark colored purples, but we've got various blues, whites, red, you know, all sorts of colors in here. And some of it is starting to tassel. I don't know if we caught footage of that. Where is there's one? Yeah, a couple of them right here are starting to send out their flower shoots, so that's exciting. Just about a week or two ago, all this corn was flattened. It lodged over in a big gust of wind, and luckily it came back up pretty strong. I did not do anything. You can see where some of the stalks are kind of bent, you know, where they blew over and then kind of self-corrected. Got some nice sneezeweed in here, more butterfly milkweed. Anyway, folks, we're going to turn this sucker back on, get her energized again, flip this little protective cover up over the batteries and the Energizer there, keep the rain off of them. And I'm going to go inside, get to some editing and some other indoor work, probably come back out here this evening. We had a really surprisingly good potato harvest this spring, and I didn't take a lot of footage because it was a bit of an experiment, but I took a few clips and I want to share the process with you all here. Basic gist is that we wanted to grow potatoes, but we didn't really have time to go and source seed potatoes and prepare a bed for them, so kind of forgot about the idea. But then the food bank, where we get a ton of food waste from, they gave us a ton of sprouting and moldy potatoes that were absolutely unfit to be eaten by people. And we decided, hey, we've got some spots in the old chicken run and in Sydney's garden where we don't have anything planned for the moment. And so we basically just dug a little shallow trench, plopped a bunch of these, moldy seed potatoes from the food bank in. And, who knows what they've been sprayed with. We had no idea if they were going to sprout. A lot of them were green, but not sprouting. And like I said, a lot of them had mold. So we just stuck them in the ground, covered them up with some mulch, and forgot about them. You can see here how they looked going into Sydney's garden, how they looked going up in the old chicken coop, or in the old chicken run, rather. This is where we had the chickens last year, and the roosters are up there now, but they're fenced out of this little section. And so basically just fill a trench with potatoes, cover them with some soil and mulch. I watered them a few times after planting, but I think overall this entire season I've watered these potatoes less than 5 times. Kind of just forgot about them, came back and pulled a ton out of the ground. I hope you guys enjoyed this little tour. Let me know what all you want to see more of in the next video. Let me know if you guys got comments or questions. I'd love to hear what you're growing in your zone. And as always, I appreciate you for being here. I'll catch you in the next one.